Welcome to Healthy Births, Happy Babies, where we share tips, tools, and stories grounded in natural childbirth and parenting principles, so that instead of feeling overwhelmed and confused during this exciting time in your life, you feel safe, supported, and empowered in your childbirth and parenting journey. And now, here's your host, Dr. Jay Warren.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Healthy Births, Happy Babies. I'm Dr. Jay Warren. I am the Family Wellness Chiropractor and the Wellness Care Coordinator here at the CAP Wellness Center. And today we have an amazing guest for you. His name is Dr. Ryan French, and he is going to be talking to you about a dad's perspective on birth. But before I introduce Dr. Ryan to you, I want to take this moment to thank our sponsor, the CAP Wellness Center. The CAP Wellness Center in Encinitas, California has assembled an incredible team of fully certified holistic healthcare professionals that offer the very best in prenatal and postpartum wellness services. We offer acupuncture, chiropractic, massage, yoga, lactation support services, and a wide variety of birth education classes to ensure that you are fully able to experience the power of birth. And now I would like to introduce to you Dr. Ryan French. Dr. Ryan is a family chiropractor practicing in Bolton, Ontario. Together with his team of incredible support staff and associate doctors, he has built the largest family chiropractic practice in the area. He is a health coach, mentor, teacher, and writer. Dr. Ryan received his doctorate from Canadian Memorial Chiropractic College in Toronto. He has a post-doctorate fellowship in pregnancy and pediatric care through the ICPA, certification in the Webster technique, certification to practice clinical acupuncture, and has taken many other courses in nutrition, exercise, and preventative health. His hobbies include coaching, hockey, fishing, golf, and never-ending learning. He is blessed with an incredible family, including a loving wife, Suzanne, and 4 beautiful children, Jessica, Jackson, Jordan, and Jacob. All right, and with that, I'd like to welcome to the podcast Dr. Ryan French. Dr. Ryan, hello.
How are you?
I'm doing great this morning. How are you doing?
Yeah, doing great, thanks.
Good. Well, thank you for being with us. We listened to in your bio just now that you are certainly a very accomplished chiropractor. You have a huge practice, family practice in Canada. Where in Ontario are you?
Bolton, Ontario.
Bolton.
We're about 40 minutes north of the Toronto airport, so the main airport there in the Toronto area.
God, Toronto's beautiful.
Indeed.
Yes. And so, like I said, you're extremely accomplished as a chiropractor, and there's a lot of wisdom there to share, I'm sure, too. But we're going to do things a little bit differently on this show today. Healthy Births, Happy Babies is all about pregnancy, birth, and growing our kids healthy. And most of our listeners are women. They're either pregnant women, expecting moms, or moms-to-be. And today, what we're going to do a little different is to have you share your perspective on birth as a dad. I'm sure, as a chiropractor, that influences how you regard birth and went through that. But really, I wanted you to share today your perspective on birth as a dad. We heard in your bio that you have 4 lovely kids.
Yeah.
And what are their ages?
This year they turned 12, 10, 8, and 5.
12, 10, 8, and 5. And each of those birth experiences were very different.
Radically different.
Radically different. So before we get into all of that, tell us a little bit more, share us a little more about yourself and, you as a chiropractor as well as a dad, and then we can jump into your birth experience.
Yeah, well, we have a great family practice in Bolton, Ontario. We've been here for 12 years and absolutely love it. We see, a high percentage of kids. I think that we're about half of our practice is under the age of 12. And we take care of a lot of moms throughout the pregnancy and for the baby shortly thereafter. I have 4 kids. They keep us really busy. They're all super athletic, so in our extra time we have 2 competitive gymnasts and a boy on a rep hockey team that I happen to be the coach of as well, and then the little guy starting off in hockey school. So we live our life pretty actively. We don't really watch TV and things like that. We spend most of the time traveling around to different events, and my wife's an accomplished triathlete, and when I get a chance, I get to be out there as well. I think that it's amazing in our community. I'm known as a pretty healthy guy, but I think I'm the least fit in my house.
You sound like you have a very active family.
For sure.
Yeah. And so going into your perspective as a dad on births, we talked before as we were setting up this interview in the weeks past about, you had 4 kids and every single type of delivery imaginable for those 4. It's very different. And a lot of what we're trying to do here with Healthy Births, Happy Babies is to just dispel information. Or to give out information, dispel fears around it. Fear is a natural part of the process, but and certainly for dads, because we're coming from a different end of things. So let's jump into things there. What can you tell us about those births and your perspective on it?
Well, I think the first thing from a dad's perspective, I don't know if all guys are the same way, but I know a lot of us are, is that we like to control certain things. And we need to understand that the birth process, including for moms, while you can control how you prepare for it, you can control how healthy you are, you can control, your knowledge base in advance. The reality is when you're in the middle of it, there's a lot of things that are completely in God's control and not yours. And so for our 4 births, do you want me to go through and describe sort of briefly what happened with the 4 births? Or
sure, that would be great.
I mean, our first one was a baby girl, and my wife was super fit, and we had what ended up being a marathon labor. It was 52 hours.
Wow.
From beginning to end, and she ended up a vaginal birth, drug-free, which was what she wanted. But, there were times in that process, she dilated to 3 centimeters, and she stayed there for basically the better part of 2 days. The contractions were still pretty regular, and it was painful. What's amazing is that you're not even considered in active labor until it dilates more than that, but it sure was active from our perspective because it was, it was full painful contractions for I think about 44 hours of that 52. So it was a pretty intense process. There was her ability to go through it was purely based on her mental preparation and her physical preparation. But I'll tell you, from a dad's perspective, it was devastating to me to not be able to step in for her, to not be able to do anything. You could be supportive, and I was, and you do all the different techniques to help with discomfort and help with feeding and walking her around and doing whatever you can. But at the end of the day, you're a cheerleader who has little to no control. I respect my wife from the moment I met her, but the level of respect I had for her went through the roof when I saw what she was able to do, in delivering Jessica. And she was a happy, healthy baby who actually was clear of subluxation. I was shocked when she came out. Of course, I check all my kids when they came out, and she was clear of subluxation. I thought, historically you would think a birth that lasts that long, or a delivery that lasts that long, that it would be traumatic for the baby, but it wasn't, and she came out and has been super healthy and happy since then. So from a dad's perspective, it was difficult to watch. I remember leaving the room a couple times and just tearing up and welling up because I just felt helpless in that situation. And in the pregnancies after that, I didn't feel that same way, but that first one, no matter how much information you're still in for a bit of a shock when your emotions take over. So that's something for dads to kind of pay attention to.
Right. And in that moment when you felt you needed to leave the room and you were welling up, like what were you able to do to ground yourself to go back in and be with your wife in a different way?
I basically put my head under the sink, ran cold water over my head to calm down. It was pretty funny. I come back in, and my wife's like, well, "Where'd you go?" Like, "Oh, nowhere."
Right.
Not realizing that I was, probably going to need a bit of support too. And the midwives are really great with that. They realize that it is a bit of a marathon for both, and while what you go through as a father is not even close to what the mom does from an emotional standpoint, it is close. So. Yeah, I remember putting my head under the sink and just running cold water over it, just trying to calm the sweating down.
Right. Yeah, and the midwives and the doulas that we work with definitely are very attentive to the father as well, because that helps the birth process along, definitely if the needs are being taken care of the dad. My son was born at home. We had a midwife and a doula, and a lot of the friends that were talking with Effie about or hiring a doula was like, you're not hiring the doula for you, you're hiring it for Jay.
Right.
To be able to allow all of everyone to be on board with things.
For sure.
So then you're able to calm yourself, you go back in, and your wife has Jessica.
Yes.
And so then going on to, is Jackson your next born?
Jackson's the second one, yeah.
And what was Jackson's birth?
Jackson was 2 years later, and his was, there's no birth that's an easy birth. You don't want to give that impression, but if you had to define one as that, she went into labor early in the morning. I think we left. We went to we were too far away from any main hospital facility to have a baby at home, and so we had them. The midwives had a clinic inside a birthing center, and so we went to the birthing center, and I think we got there at 9:30, 10 o'clock, and Jackson was born sometime around noon. He was quite a bit bigger than Jessica, but it ended up being, kind of a two-push delivery that, in comparison, was really quite easy. Again, a vaginal birth, no intervention, and we were actually home, I don't know, within a couple hours afterwards. So that one was relatively uneventful.
Very different from the first one.
Yeah, so different, and even using the term uneventful almost seems unfair because it was a massive event in our lives. But when you compare the birth story, of course, that's what we're talking about. Is that it was a simpler process. And then the third one was Jordan, and she came along 2 years later. And I remember I was doing a doctor's report in my office, and Suzanne my wife was due any time, and my CA came in and said, Suzanne needs you to call right away. So I kind of got the smile on my face, and I said, to the people in the report, that must mean my wife's water has broken, and we're going to have to wrap this up relatively quick. And I got a call again saying, no, you need to call right away. And that, how I felt in that moment was very different. And so she basically had an abrupted placenta. So an abrupted placenta is where the placenta tears away, and there's an instant massive amount of blood, and is an emergency situation, specifically for the baby, but could also be potentially for the mom. I drove home. Typical drive home would be 11 to 12 minutes. I made it in just under 5.
Wow. And
I remember, just praying the whole time, and my eyes were watering, and I got to the house, and she was on the ground, and unfortunately, when it happened, she was on the ground in our bedroom, and the two kids, our two younger ones, were in the bathtub, and she couldn't get to them. So it was an absolute chaos-filled scenario. Her mom and dad got there super quick, about the same time as the ambulance, and so they were able to take the kids, and we jumped in the ambulance, and we went, and ended up having Jordan ended up being born by cesarean section.
Now, you had said before that you were too far, for the previous birth, you were too far away from a medical facility to to do a home birth. Were you very far from emergency care there?
Yeah, I think the standard for here is you have to be within a half an hour drive of a hospital, and we're at 35 minutes.
Okay.
I think you could have applied for it, but it really wasn't that big of a deal to us when we saw how awesome the birthing facility was at this place.
Yeah.
Had a birthing tub, walk-in showers, all kinds of stuff that we just really felt comfortable there. So we 35 minutes to the hospital, and by that time the bleeding had stopped. They did the ultrasound and saw what had happened, and said, we're going to end up doing a cesarean. And Jordan was born, a couple hours after that, or I guess it wasn't a couple hours, but sometimes that timeline's a bit of a blur.
Right. Now, at that time when you came home, was your wife in pain? Was she? What was her state?
She wasn't in pain. It was just the bleeding.
Right.
So it was a fear-filled time because you didn't know what happened.
Yeah.
You didn't know the source of the blood, what it was. My healthcare background went straight to, it's got to be from the placenta, but you're not sure why or what happened.
Mm-hmm.
And so she wasn't uncomfortable in any way other than fear. And she wasn't in labor. So, the thought was, do you try to induce labor and hope that she's born, right away because there's no placenta, or do you? And when you had that conversation, it was a no-brainer that the proper option was to have a cesarean. And trying to do things all naturally, it's I always say in every circumstance, like, you never stick to your guns on something if your innate's telling you the opposite. So that innate voice, that gut instinct, motherly instinct, whatever you want to call it, in that moment, both of us felt very comfortable with that decision. Yep, that's what we need to do, and that's what it is. So it ended up a C-section, and the recovery from that is very, very difficult compared to a vaginal birth. She ended up with some infections and, some challenges that go with that, and the recovery from a body standpoint is dramatically different. So anyone, I've even heard of sometimes people opting for a cesarean just because they didn't want it to be uncomfortable, and the recovery from it is dramatically different. From feeling pretty good in a few hours to taking about a month to a month and a half before she even felt okay, and many more months before she started to feel like herself again. So,
and on top of that, you have 2 other kids.
Correct. Yeah, minor detail. Exactly.
Yeah. With their needs and wants, trying to take care of them as well as a newborn.
Yeah.
And so Jordan, born by cesarean, was she healthy? Everything was fine with her?
Yes.
Okay, beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful. And so that brings us to Jacob.
Yeah, so and just kind of for awareness standpoint, before we had Jake, we had a miscarriage in between. I look at that, and it's really helped me to be able to relate to people who have gone through that part of the process too, because it is very emotional, that process. And so that happened after Jordan and before Jake. So Jake ended up coming 3 years after Jordan. By this time, Suzanne was, I can't remember her exact age at that point. I think she was in her later 30s, and so she was, by medical standards, considered high risk because of her age. Mm-hmm. And then because it was, she'd already had a cesarean and had a desire to have a VBAC, which stands for vaginal birth after cesarean. They had some input on that as to how they thought that could go, and that maybe she wouldn't be able to do that. But I always tell my moms that your ability to deliver a child has more to do with your level of fitness than it does to do with your age. So I just had a patient who's 49 have a baby and super healthy, and is an easier process than some younger people just because the mom was in such good shape. So Suzanne is super fit, and ended up having a VBAC with Jake. And the only time we had a bit of a hiccup in that process, it was shorter, like Jackson's was, and but she had stopped dilating. I think it was at around 7 centimeters, and she kind of got stuck in that position. And when things stop progressing, dads, it's important to understand that sometimes fear can set in for the mom, where that some lack of belief in their body's innate ability to go through this process might show up, because things get stalled, and then the healthcare professionals start to treat it as if something's going wrong, and then that fear sets in. And I don't know how I came up with the idea, but I saw a chart on the wall that had the concentric circles of dilation, so 3, 6, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, all the way up to 10 centimeter, and they had the size of the circles on the wall. And so I took the chart off the wall, and I put it in front of Suzanne, who was laboring, standing up, bent over the bed, and I just said, "Hon, I just want you to look at that 7th circle, and I just want you to picture it turning into that 8th one, and picture it turning into that 9th. Just visualize that turning into the 10th." And after being what they would call stalled for probably about 6 hours at that 7 centimeters, she went to 10 centimeters in about 15 minutes.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Wow.
And the midwives had told me that afterwards, that's something that they started to use regularly, just to be able to help visualize that opening. And Jake was born vaginally, and no drugs, no surgery with him, and he was super healthy as well. So 4 really different births that tugged on your heartstrings and your confidence strings in all different ways. But I'm so grateful for them, and I think that from a doctor's perspective, I think it makes me an even better doctor, because you've been through those experiences. One of the things with taking care of pregnant moms that I need to obviously understand is that while I can always understand, I can't always relate.
Yes.
But at least these experiences give me some context about the fears that moms go through, the fears that dads go through, and at the other side of all of that, we were gifted with 4 gorgeous, beautiful kids. They're just and that's kind of the big picture of it, is that those details of the birth. I had to talk to my wife a little bit about this, because the details of the birth sometimes you don't remember the anxiety as much, because of the fact that at the end you get such a great prize.
Yes. Yes.
So, which has been a tremendous blessing.
Yes, and that's something I talk with the expecting moms about a lot, especially in the last couple of weeks, when can be a lot of discomfort and anticipation and just kind of being done with the pregnancy. But imagining, all right, these last few days, at the end of it, you're going to get to hold your little baby. You're finally going to get to meet them. And the birth experience, knowing that end goal and that end prize, as you said it, can really help throughout the process.
Yeah, I think that's a really great thing for you to do.
Now, out of all, or with your experience of all of these births, as a dad and looking through it, kind of say a trend throughout of it, what are the main things that really helped you, or that you did that really helped your wife, that you could recommend to dads listening to this, or to the moms that are going to tell their dads to do it?
One thing I would always say is to have a conversation, the what-if conversation in advance. So what if things aren't progressing and they're suggesting induction? What if, and go through that, because if you don't consider it, the decisions that you make when you're emotional, and in your wife's case, emotional and in pain, might be different than you otherwise would. And so you have to be an advocate for your wife in an environment where you have to remember they're trying to follow policies that are set by insurance standards, and or by, so they're, as an example with Jessica, because her water had broken so far in advance, there was quite a lot of conversation about we want her on an antibiotic drip because of a risk of infection.
Right.
And so again, that was one thing we had talked about in advance. And so we said, okay, the water's broken in advance. They want to do antibiotics. What's the timeline that we're comfortable with before you go into full active labor, before we would talk about it? And so for us, we had said, I'm forgetting even what we had decided on, but let's say we said, 48 hours. Well, she was already in active labor by then, and we weren't nearly as worried. But it's a conversation you'd have to have in advance, otherwise it can be anxiety-filled. And then also, whatever your wife likes from a nutrition standpoint and whatnot, it's important to have that available. So whether she likes certain types of juices, certain types of, whatever that is, when she's uncomfortable, does your wife prefer ice or warmth or heat? So you have those things available. And yes, the doula and the midwives and stuff are involved in that process, but I like to be in there with that. You can do some tractioning on the pelvis. So 2 of our babies were posterior. So posterior means that the baby's face is facing towards the mom's spine rather than the other way, and so it's typically a lot more painful for the mom. And so getting her into being down on all fours and pushing down on her sacrum towards her tailbone was quite a relieving position for her, and it's something that I taught the midwives how to do for other moms, just to kind of help get that, take the pressure off of the nerve plexus that's on the front of the sacrum there. So there's lots of little things that you can help from a comfort standpoint. And then the other side is talk about what you want to do after the baby's born. So do you want to cut the cord right away? Do you want the baby to be put up on mom's chest? Do you want to have an opportunity, to just stay that way for a while? Like, what would you like to do? And people have all different things about what they wanted to do, but being the dad, you never know if the mom's going to be in a state to be able to speak for herself. You just actually don't know that in advance. And so you talk to the mom about all those things in advance. And I find that's really helpful, so you can be an advocate for her and an advocate for the baby when it comes out. So.
Right. And it also, going through this experience myself, those what-if conversations, it gives us something to do to fulfill that kind of protector that comes up naturally during that process. We obviously can't take away the pain of the contractions and the surges and the like, but if we can in advance know what food she likes, or comfort measures, or even just having had those conversations around before baby's born and after baby's born, that gives us, something to do before, so we can actually be doing something constructive rather than making up something to do that might get in the way of things.
That's true. You know what? We could be talking about this as if we're professionals, and maybe my wife just made it up so it would keep me distracted and out of the way. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I know that a lot of that birth education classes that Effie and I took, specifically hypnobirthing, a lot of it was birth prep. And as I said, we had a home birth, but part of my job before delivery came was to pack the hospital bag. It's a list of all the things like, should we need to do a transfer? These are the things we need to bring with. And I was so happy to have a list of something to do in those last couple of weeks before delivery. And, our instructor said, just as you said about the what if conversations, is to prepare for the worst, but expect the best.
Right.
And so she said, as soon as you have that hospital bag packed and you put it in the closet and you know where it is, you're not going to need it. Then that part of that fear is gone, and it won't put anything towards the delivery experience that might need it. As you said, there's tons of things that are out of our control, but the more that we can, alleviate fear going into it allows that process to be as powerful and as natural and as beautiful as it's designed to be.
For sure.
Yeah. So in wrapping up, I have two more questions to ask you. But before we get into those two questions, Dr. Ryan, how can people get in touch with you if they have, like, say, follow-up questions or involved in, programs you have or education materials that you might have?
I think the easiest way to get in touch with us is through our main office website, www.chiro.org, or I just started a personal kind of blog webpage, drryanfrench.com. I think those are the two easiest ways. You can look up on YouTube. We have a few number of videos on there, and but even through the website, if they had some questions, they could post those through the website.
Okay, great. And for those of you listening, I will include those links in the show notes that if you're listening to this in iTunes, or the webpage that we'll have set up on capwellnesscenter.com dedicated to this podcast. So you'll have those links. So thank you for that. Now, the last two questions that I always like to finish up with is one about advice for the moms listening, or the moms-to-be listening, and then one for the babies. So starting with the moms, what's one thing that you'd like for all of the moms listening, or the moms-to-be that are expecting their babies, to hear and really take to heart about what we talked about today?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, I've been studying the human body since 1993, so 22 years. I personally have performed over 400,000 adjustments or patient visits. So with that type of experience with the human body, the one thing that we know for sure is that the body is absolutely designed with perfection. And so as a woman, there should be, moms, you should have just such an amazing faith and understanding that your body was built for this. Your body's designed for this. All the different things that happen during the birth process that you're not sure how that's going to happen or how it's going to go, you're designed for it. That's the way that the body's supposed to work. And a belief in that. The biggest fear comes when you don't believe in yourself. So I just want you to actually just believe that you're designed for this.
Beautiful. Thank you. And then the last question is for the babies. If you could whisper one thing, one little message or piece of wisdom into the ear of a little baby whose parents listening right now, what would that be?
You are loved. You are loved. Love is typically something that develops over time in a relationship and whatnot. But in this instant, that baby will come out and they are instantly loved beyond the parent's ability to explain with words. You can't, I tear up now thinking about that feeling of when they came out having, a little girl, a little boy, and then a little girl again, and a little boy again. They're instantly loved. And I don't know any other way to come into the world than to be instantly enveloped with love.
Yeah, and I just got the goosebumps listening to you as well. I remember the first time I saw my son and I got to catch him. It's just, and as you said, it's indescribable. We try as much as we can, but it is indescribable. Well, thank you for that. Dr. Ryan, this has been an amazing conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your experience. A lot of those have been difficult experiences, but thankfully on the other end of it, they turned out beautifully. And I know it'll be extremely helpful for our listeners here. So thank you again. It's been a pleasure talking with you, and I wish you all of the best.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Take good care. Be well.
Thanks.
Thank you for joining us today. For more information about this episode and other natural childbirth and parenting topics, please visit us at capwellnesscenter.com or message us on our Facebook page with any questions you might have. We here at the Cap Wellness Center look forward to helping you and your family be as happy and healthy as you can be.